Imagine you are floating with me above Mars, gliding slowly over its vast, silent deserts. You feel the soft hum of the shuttle's engines beneath your seat, a vibration that travels through your feet and settles quietly in your chest. Outside your window, endless red sands ripple beneath the sunlight, shaped by winds you cannot hear but almost sense brushing across the surface. Watch as craters, valleys, and cliffs unfold beneath you, carved over millions of years by dust and time. Notice the subtle shift of colors, from deep russet to soft orange, as the sun moves across the horizon. Every detail is real, captured and mapped by science, yet your mind stretches to take it all in. Before we drift further, remember that even a simple like or subscribe helps keep this journey alive. Small gestures make a real difference. Now, take a slow breath, close your eyes, prepare for sleep, and let yourself feel everything around you. Let your imagination continue to carry you, floating gently above Mars' quiet deserts, while the landscape unfolds endlessly below. You feel the gentle hum of the shuttle beneath your feet as it glides through the blackness of space. The vibration is almost imperceptible, like a soft pulse that keeps time with your own heartbeat. You lean slightly against the smooth metal wall, your hand brushing the cool surface, and notice the subtle warmth radiating from the controls. Ahead, through the wide panoramic window, Mars comes into view. Its surface glows in shades of orange, red, and pale yellow, each color shifting subtly as sunlight touches the curves and valleys. You blink and your eyes adjust, tracing the outlines of distant mountains and plains that stretch beyond the horizon. The shuttle tilts slightly, and you feel it respond beneath you, a slow sway that gives a sense of weightlessness, yet keeps you grounded in the moment. You press your forehead gently against the glass and focus. There, you can see the faint clouds that drift above the surface, thin wisps of frozen carbon dioxide and dust carried by the wind. They swirl slowly, almost silently, above plains that have not felt rain in millions of years. You realize how quiet this planet is, how empty, and yet how alive its surface remains in the patterns etched by wind and rock. Your eyes wander over the plains. Some areas are smooth and flat, the sand colored deep red like rust, while other sections are rough with rocks scattered in patterns that suggest past impacts or flowing lava. You notice subtle ripples across certain dunes, almost like waves frozen in time. Each ripple tells a story of wind and erosion, of tiny particles pushed slowly across the surface over millennia. You reach out as if you could touch them, imagining the texture under your fingers, fine, dry grains, almost powdery, slipping through your hand like cold sand on a desert beach. You feel the stillness around you, the absence of sound beyond the shuttle, and it heightens your awareness of every small vibration, every flicker of light across the Martian surface. The sun hits the planet at an angle, casting long shadows across the terrain. You follow these shadows with your eyes, noticing how they exaggerate the height of ridges and deepen the hollows of craters. The colors change with the light. Reds deepen into burnt sienna. Ochres fade to soft yellow. You trace the line of a distant plateau, its edges sharp against the soft haze of the atmosphere. Mars's thin air allows sunlight to pass with little scattering, so the horizon feels close and sharp. Yet you know the plains extend far beyond what you can see. You take a slow breath and feel the shuttle respond slightly, a gentle rocking that reminds you that you are moving over a living, changing surface, even if that change is imperceptibly slow. You adjust your position and bring your gaze to a large plain below. From here, you can see the patterns formed by dust devils, small, swirling columns of air lifting dust from the surface. They are tiny, but they move with purpose, twisting and turning in paths dictated by unseen winds. You imagine their movement over hours, days, years, slowly shaping the dunes around them. You notice the texture of the ground, variations in color and smoothness that hint at differences in mineral content. Some areas reflect light more brightly, showing deposits of iron oxide. Others appear darker, almost grey, suggesting exposed rock or denser sediment. Every detail tells you something about Mars's history, about the forces that have shaped it long before humans ever dreamed of seeing it. As the shuttle glides, you feel the change in perspective. From above, everything seems orderly and serene, yet closer inspection reveals chaos in the details. Cracks in the surface hint at ancient volcanic activity or the slow contraction of the crust. Tiny craters pockmark the landscape, reminders of impacts from objects that crossed the solar system long ago. You lean closer to the window, noticing how the light falls differently on each crater, revealing its depth and structure. You can almost see the layers within the walls, each one a record of past collisions, wind deposition, or lava flows. You sense the age in these formations, the slow accumulation of events that have left their mark over billions of years. Your attention is drawn to a faint line in the distance. It is the edge of a canyon, a shallow indentation at first, but it deepens as your eyes follow it across the plain. You imagine the forces that carved it: wind, possible water flow, the shifting of the crust. The line twists and turns, disappearing and reappearing as the light changes. You notice how the surface on either side differs subtly in color and texture. You can almost feel the temperature shift as the shuttle passes over sunlit rock versus shaded ground. Even though you are enclosed, your senses seem to extend, reaching toward the planet, connecting you to its surface in a way that feels immediate and real. You shift slightly to take in more of the horizon. There, faintly, you see the rise of distant hills. Their curves are soft, yet their scale is immense. You track their slopes, seeing how the sand and rock interact to form smooth arcs interrupted by jagged ridges. You realize that every shape you see is the product of physical laws, wind, gravity, and time. You reach out to touch the window again, imagining the solid surface beneath, the grains of sand underfoot, the dry air brushing against your skin if you could step outside. You feel a calm thrill, a quiet awe at seeing the planet in this moment, untouched and unspoiled. The shuttle makes a gentle turn, giving you a new angle. You see light glinting off rock faces, small shadows shifting as you move. Dust drifts in faint, almost invisible trails across plains, illuminated where sunlight catches it. You imagine the particles floating slowly, dancing across the surface, shaped by invisible currents in the thin air. The sense of motion is subtle but real. You feel the shuttle adjust, a slight pressure against your body, and you realize you are moving along with all of this. Part of the observation, part of the experience. Every visual detail, every shadow, every glint of light is registered by your senses, painting a full picture of a living, breathing planet, even in its quietest moments. As you scan the landscape, your eyes catch the edge of a plateau. Its rim is sharp, cutting a clear line against the sky. Below, shadows stretch into valleys, revealing contours invisible from further away. You notice faint variations in the red tones, the result of different mineral compositions and subtle differences in the surface's age. You imagine running your fingers over it, feeling the roughness, the cracks, the layered sediment, but instead, you let your gaze and mind wander over it. Every ridge, every dip, every ripple is a story waiting to be understood. You feel the connection, the way the shuttle and your own senses are conduits to this quiet, distant world. You turn slightly to take in the broader view. Mars stretches endlessly, plains merging into distant hills, valleys, and faint mountains. The scale is hard to comprehend, yet your eyes adjust, picking out detail after detail. You feel the calm of this solitude, the absence of noise, the total quiet of a planet with no wind as we know it, no movement you can hear, only the patterns of sand and stone etched over eons. You sense the subtle warmth from sunlight filtering through the window, contrasting with the cold shadowed regions beyond. Every sense is engaged, and you are acutely aware of your place in this moment. Suspended above Mars, part observer, part participant, fully alive to the experience. The shuttle shifts again, giving you another angle. You notice the curve of the planet, a subtle arc that hints at its roundness and size. Thin clouds drift across plains, casting fleeting shadows. You see distant dunes rise and fall like gentle waves frozen in time. The light plays across ridges and craters, emphasizing textures you could not have imagined from Earth. You lean forward, holding the rail lightly, feeling your pulse match the gentle hum beneath you. You are present here fully, your eyes, ears, and mind absorbing every detail. This is the first real connection with Mars, a quiet moment that sets the stage for everything you are about to experience. The planet stretches out beneath you, vast and still, inviting you to explore, to observe, and to feel the deep ancient rhythms that have shaped it for billions of years. You shift slightly in your seat as the shuttle begins a gentle descent toward the Martian surface. The hum beneath you changes, subtle, almost like a soft pulse quickening as the shuttle responds to the planet's gravity. You reach forward and touch the smooth metal of the console. It feels cool, solid, reassuring. Through the panoramic window, the desert spreads out endlessly. The plains are enormous, flat in some areas, while in others, dunes rise and fall like frozen waves. You lean closer to the glass, your breath fogging it faintly before the cold dissipates. You notice the tiny details, ridges along the dunes, shadows stretching across the sand, and the way sunlight catches the tips of the ripples. You see the dunes are not all the same. Some are tall and sharp, their peaks casting long, thin shadows. Others are low and round, rolling gently like hills on a beach. You reach out your hand as if you could touch them, imagining the soft, dry sand slipping between your fingers. The sand is a deep, rusty red, the color of iron oxide, but in places it shifts to lighter yellows and soft ochres. Patches of grey rock appear occasionally, breaking the monotony, showing where the ground is harder and more resistant to wind. You feel the scale of it all, the vastness pressing quietly on your senses, stretching as far as your eyes can see. The shuttle glides slowly forward. You notice the wind has shaped the sand over millions of years. Each ripple, each curve of a dune tells the story of aeolian processes. You can imagine invisible currents moving the grains, twisting and turning, lifting tiny particles just enough to make the dunes shift. Even though the atmosphere is thin, it is enough to sculpt the surface slowly but steadily. You watch as the light shifts over the ridges, highlighting tiny patterns you would not have noticed from far above. The shadows deepen in the troughs between dunes, giving a three-dimensional texture that makes you feel like you could walk across the landscape and feel every rise and fall beneath your feet. Your eyes are drawn to a long, smooth plain beyond the dunes. It stretches far, almost to the horizon, with small patches of rough rock scattered like stepping stones. You notice subtle changes in color. Where the sun hits directly, the sand glows with a warm red-orange. In shadow, it takes on a cooler tone, almost grey. You imagine the temperature, differences across the surface, how the sun heats the sand by day, and how it cools quickly at night in the thin air. You can feel the stillness, the quiet, and it makes the movement of the shuttle feel both gentle and deliberate, as if you are floating right above the surface. The dunes change as you move. You pass a series of crescent-shaped formations, called barchans, their tips pointing in the direction the wind usually blows. You can almost feel the wind that formed them, the persistent push over years that creates these shapes. The slopes on the windward side are gentle, the leeward side steep, and you follow the curve with your eyes. Dust drifts along the ridges in thin, faint lines. It is so subtle you have to focus, yet it is there, a constant whisper of motion on a quiet planet. You imagine the particles catching sunlight as they float, glimmering for a moment before settling again. Your hand presses lightly against the window, and you almost feel the texture, the fine grit of sand carried invisibly through the thin atmosphere. You notice a series of dunes forming parallel lines. Some are wider, some narrow, and the pattern is broken in places by rocky outcrops. You imagine the way these dunes migrated over time, pushed by winds that barely exist compared to Earth. You feel the slow rhythm of the planet, the way it reshapes itself on a timescale far longer than you can grasp. You follow a single ripple with your gaze. It is only a few centimeters high, but it repeats for meters, tracing the subtle currents of air that continue to move over the surface. You feel a sense of calm watching this, a quiet respect for the invisible forces that sculpt Mars so patiently. A faint haze rises from some dunes. You realize it is fine dust lifted by microwinds floating just above the surface. It glows softly in the sunlight, a delicate shimmer that shifts as you move. You lean your head against the window, tracing the patterns with your eyes. Every dune seems unique. Some twist into curves like brushstrokes across a canvas. Others rise abruptly from flat plains, forming ridges with jagged lines. The colors shift subtly, telling you about the minerals that make up the sand. Iron oxide dominates, giving the red tone, but patches of lighter silicates and darker basalt show a variety of origins and ages. You feel the diversity of the planet under your gaze, even in places that seem empty at first glance. The shuttle turns slightly, and your perspective changes. From this angle, you can see a long chain of dunes extending across the horizon. Their edges catch the sunlight, sharp and clear. The troughs between them are shadowed, darkening as the sun climbs higher. You imagine walking along one, feeling each step sink into the soft sand, your footprints lasting until the wind erases them slowly. You notice small cracks in some dunes, the result of seasonal changes and temperature shifts. The ground is not uniform. It responds to time and weather. Each ripple and ridge a record of movement, energy, and change. You scan the plains further. There are low, flat areas between dune fields, almost like desert basins. You notice the texture is smoother here, yet tiny lines suggest wind action continues even in these calm stretches. The colors are subtler, softer. You imagine dust drifting across them, settling in thin layers, slowly building over years. You feel the patience of Mars, how quiet and still it is, yet how much it accomplishes in shaping its own surface. You watch as the shuttle glides over these basins, the view shifting gradually, giving you a new perspective with every moment. Above you, thin clouds of frozen carbon dioxide float, almost invisible against the pale sky. They cast faint shadows on the dunes below, shifting as the shuttle moves. You feel the contrast between shadowed and sunlit sand, noticing how color and depth are enhanced. You imagine the cold, thin air brushing across your skin if you could step outside. Every sense is engaged in this quiet observation, every detail recorded in your mind. You feel part of the planet's rhythm, moving with it, floating above its deserts, witnessing patterns that took millions of years to form. The shuttle drifts over a cluster of dunes that rise like small hills from the plains. Their ridges are crisp, their slopes delicate. You notice tiny lines carved into the sides, caused by micro-avalanches as sand shifts down the steep faces. You follow them with your eyes, imagining the movement in slow motion. The wind on Mars is subtle but persistent. You feel a soft sense of motion from the shuttle as you pass, a gentle rocking that matches the quiet energy of the landscape. The colors shift again, from deep reds to softer yellows, where dust has accumulated. You notice faint darker patches of basalt rock beneath the sand, hints of the planet's volcanic past. You sweep your gaze further. Dunes merge into broader plains that stretch toward distant ridges. You notice subtle textures, areas where dust has collected in shallow depressions, and patches where harder rock is exposed. You imagine the tiny forces at work, particles moving millimeter by millimeter, shaping the surface, leaving traces for you to see from above. Every ridge, every line, every small variation is evidence of the planet's quiet persistence. You feel the immensity of it all, the endless repetition of forms across a surface that has known time on a scale far beyond human experience. The sun continues to rise, casting longer, softer shadows that stretch across the dunes. You notice a change in hue, reds deepening, ochres warming, and the greys of rock taking on subtle shades. You lean forward, focusing on the way the light reveals small ridges and folds. You imagine running your hand over the sand, feeling each tiny grain, yet you know that the scale is enormous. Each dune is both delicate and immense. You feel your senses expand, taking in the textures, the colors, the shadows, the silence all at once. The Martian desert is alive in its quiet way, and you are moving with it, observing, feeling, and understanding it as never before. The shuttle floats slowly over the dunes, the motion smooth and almost hypnotic. You watch as lines of sand curve, twist, and repeat, forming patterns that feel both random and ordered. Dust drifts in faint spirals along the ridges, catching light, disappearing, and reappearing. You notice how the terrain changes gradually, from tightly packed dunes to more scattered formations, giving you a sense of scale and variation. You feel the planet's rhythm, the slow, patient shaping of sand by invisible forces, and it fills you with calm, awe, and curiosity. You are not just watching Mars, you are experiencing it, every ripple, every shadow, every shift of light and color passing directly through your senses. The shuttle tilts slightly, and you lean forward to follow the horizon as the vast plains of Mars begin to give way to a series of depressions and bowls carved into the surface. The first crater appears below, immense and circular, its walls rising sharply from the surrounding plains. You notice the rim, jagged and uneven, with small ridges formed from rock that was thrown outward during the impact that created it. You feel a quiet awe at the scale. This crater is enormous, stretching many kilometers across, and you realize that standing at the edge, you would be dwarfed by its size. The sunlight casts long shadows along the inner walls, revealing layers of sediment that tell a story far older than human history. You lean closer to the glass, following each shadow with your eyes, letting your senses absorb the texture, the depth, and the quiet strength of the formation. As the shuttle glides forward, another crater comes into view. This one is shallower, the edges smoothed by time and wind. You can see small ripples of dust on the floor, shaped by subtle currents in the thin Martian atmosphere. You imagine standing there, your feet sinking slightly into fine sand, feeling the weight of billions of years pressing down in silence. The central peak rises from the middle, a small mountain formed by the rebound of the crust after the original impact. You trace its outline carefully, noticing how the sunlight highlights one side, while the other remains in shadow. Each layer of rock tells a story. You feel connected to the planet's history in a direct way, as if you could almost read the timeline in the rocks themselves. The shuttle passes over a third crater, wider and older, with edges that have eroded into softer shapes. You notice ejecta spread around its rim, scattered rocks and debris that were thrown outward during the impact. Some rocks are small, others massive, like pieces of the planet itself that flew briefly through the sky before landing again. You imagine the force required to move these stones, the energy released in the instant of collision. You feel a faint vibration from the shuttle as it moves, and your mind connects it to the same force that shaped the crater below. You reach out toward the window, as if to touch the surface, imagining the dust slipping through your fingers and the jagged rocks pressing cold and hard beneath your palm. A series of smaller craters appears next, scattered across the plains. They vary in size, some only a few meters across, others vast, showing the random bombardment that Mars has experienced over time. You notice faint lines of wind-blown dust that have settled into patterns along the edges and floors, smoothing some areas and leaving others rough and broken. The light plays across the terrain, highlighting the texture and revealing subtle differences in rock type. You feel a sense of calm as you watch, the repetition of form across such immense space, giving a rhythm to your observation. Each crater is a record of an event, an impact that shook the planet, frozen forever in the silence. Your eyes focus on a massive depression in the distance, Hellas Basin. Its walls rise like cliffs, the interior stretching wide and flat. You can see lighter patches of sediment contrasting with deeper red areas where the sun catches the surface differently. The scale is staggering. You imagine driving across it, how many hours it would take to cross the floor, how tiny you would feel beneath its walls. Dust drifts faintly along the edges, caught in microcurrents, a delicate movement you almost miss if you do not pay attention. You trace the shadow of one side of the basin, noticing subtle ridges that suggest the impact fractured the crust beneath. Every detail adds depth to your understanding, showing both the violence of the impact and the slow processes that followed. The shuttle passes closer to Argia Planitia next, a circular depression formed by an ancient collision. You see the rim rise steeply, broken into segments where erosion has softened the edges over eons. In the center, there are small hills, remnants of the original central uplift. Dust and sand cover much of the floor, but lines of darker rock peek through, hinting at the material thrown up during the impact. You watch as the sunlight moves across the crater, shadows stretching and shortening, revealing the shape of ridges and depressions. You feel the scale in your body, your mind reaching for the distance across the basin. Every curve and fold is evidence of forces that humans cannot reproduce, showing the raw power of the universe. You glide over smaller craters nearby, their edges pockmarked with holes and fractures. You notice layered sediment along the inner walls, some lighter, some darker, evidence of changes in mineral composition and past environmental conditions. You lean closer, imagining the time it took for wind and dust to smooth some walls, for small rocks to tumble into the floor. You feel the quiet persistence of the planet, the way Mars slowly heals after impacts, yet every scar remains, telling its story. You follow a line of tiny dust streaks, faint trails left by micro-avalanches along the slopes. The movement is slow, almost invisible, but real. You imagine your hand hovering just above the surface, feeling the faint energy of the shifting particles, knowing the air is too thin to carry sound, yet the motion is undeniable. The shuttle shifts gently to give you a new perspective. You look across a series of overlapping craters. Some rims are sharp, some rounded, showing differences in age and erosion. You notice patterns of light and shadow that reveal subtle slopes and hidden ridges. Dust collects in pockets, tiny dunes forming on the floors, showing that wind continues to sculpt even these ancient scars. You follow one slope with your eyes, tracing it from rim to floor. You can see the faint layering of rock, each line a record of material deposited before or after the impact. You feel a connection to time itself, understanding that these formations are much older than any human story, yet they exist for you to observe now. You notice a particularly deep crater ahead. The walls are nearly vertical, layered with bands of sediment that catch the light differently. Shadows run down the slopes like rivers frozen in time. You focus on a jagged ridge near the rim, seeing tiny fractures and cracks where rock has broken off over millions of years. You feel your senses sharpen, absorbing the depth and texture, imagining how each layer tells a chapter of Mars' long geological history. The central peak rises from the floor, a small mountain that gives a sense of relief in the otherwise flat basin. You imagine standing on top, looking outward across the crater floor, feeling the scale of the impact and the quiet emptiness surrounding you. The shuttle drifts past a field of smaller impact sites, each one unique. Some have steep walls, others shallow depressions, some almost completely filled with dust. You notice streaks of lighter material on the floors, possibly deposits from the surrounding terrain. You follow the sunlight as it moves, highlighting the contours and revealing hidden ridges. You feel the sweep of space beneath the shuttle, the gentle vibration connecting you to the surface below. You watch as shadows lengthen and shorten across the craters, emphasizing depth and texture. Your mind traces the story. An object from space strikes, the crust rebounding, material thrown outward, dust and sand settling, wind reshaping the edges. You are witnessing billions of years of history in these frozen scars. A small chain of craters catches your attention. They are aligned as if something passed over the surface, leaving marks in a line. You imagine the trajectory of the object, the moment of collision, and the energy released. The floors are dusty, the rims broken in some areas, smooth in others. You notice tiny sand ridges along the slopes, formed by microcurrents in the thin air. You lean closer to the window, feeling the detail in your vision. You see every small ridge, every shadow, every grain of dust moving subtly. You feel the connection to the planet's violent past, and yet also to its quiet present, where wind and sun continue to shape every surface slowly and gently. The shuttle floats over a particularly broad crater. The rim is high and jagged, casting shadows deep into the depression. Layers of sediment and rock reveal themselves as the sun catches the edges. You notice lighter lines, perhaps deposits of different minerals, contrasting with the deep red of iron-rich dust. You feel the scale in your chest, the emptiness stretching outward, rim to rim, the floor far below your gaze. Tiny streaks of dust drift across the surface, almost invisible, yet their movement adds life to this quiet space. You watch for minutes, tracing the edges, the peaks, the shadows, letting your senses register the size, age, and beauty of these ancient scars. As the shuttle continues, more craters appear, some overlapping, some isolated. Each is different, and each is a testament to the random bombardment that shaped Mars. You notice how the light changes with every degree of movement, revealing hidden slopes and subtle dips. You feel your eyes adjusting to the scale, your mind connecting each detail into a larger picture of the planet's surface. Dust settles in one area, shifts in another. Ridges rise and fall, and you are there, moving with it all, observing with every sense. The craters are not just holes in the ground. They are records of force, time, and planetary history, and you are reading them, fully present, fully alive to the slow story of Mars unfolding beneath you. The shuttle glides forward, and your eyes are drawn to the rising shapes on the horizon. A faint shadow grows, then sharpens into a massive peak. You realize you are approaching Olympus Mons, the largest volcano in the solar system. Even from this distance, you feel its scale pressing against your mind. The summit is far above the plains, a broad, flat caldera stretching wider than any mountain you have seen on Earth. You lean forward, your hand resting lightly on the window, imagining the climb, the walk along the rim, the sheer distance across its top. The shadows along the slopes reveal subtle ridges, lava flows frozen in place, and faint lines of sediment built over millions of years. You feel small, a tiny observer in front of a monument of planetary power. The shuttle drifts closer, and you notice the slopes of Olympus Mons are surprisingly gentle. From a distance, it looks like a hill, but the scale quickly overwhelms your sense of proportion. You follow the base with your eyes. It spreads outward in broad arcs, the lava flows creating patterns like frozen rivers. The surface is textured, some areas smooth from flows, others rough where lava cooled in jagged formations. You imagine standing there, feeling the solidified rock under your hands, the cold wind brushing your face, the emptiness around you. The sheer quiet of the planet amplifies the vastness. Even the shuttle's hum feels faint, almost swallowed by the scale of the landscape below. You turn your gaze to the surrounding region, the Tharsis Plateau. Other volcanoes rise, smaller than Olympus Mons, but still enormous. You see Ascraeus Mons, Pavonis Mons, and Arsia Mons, each with a broad caldera at its summit. The shapes are graceful, flowing, yet immense. You trace the ridges along their sides, noticing the lines of ancient lava flows that stretch into the plains below. Some flows are wide and flat, others narrow and twisted, evidence of different eruptions, temperatures, and viscosities. You lean closer to the window, following the path of a single lava channel, imagining the molten rock moving slowly, reshaping the surface before cooling into the patterns you now see. The sunlight catches the caldera rims, casting deep shadows that emphasize depth. You follow the edges, seeing how the land falls away steeply into the hollow centers. You notice small fissures in the rock, cracks that suggest cooling and contraction after eruptions. Dust has settled in some areas, smoothing textures, while in others, the rock remains sharp, jagged. You imagine the heat when the volcano was active, the fire and smoke, the movement of lava across such a wide area. Then you return to the calm present, feeling the quiet, the patience of the planet, the way it tells its story silently through shapes, colors, and textures. You drift along the side of Olympus Mons, watching the slopes rise and fall gently. The red dust of Mars coats the lava flows, softening the edges, blending colors into muted tones. You notice subtle variations, darker basalt in some areas, lighter oxidized rock in others. The patterns tell you about the planet's history, how different eruptions left layers across time. You imagine the wind brushing over the slopes, lifting fine particles, leaving behind ripples and tiny dunes. You feel the scale in your body, the vast emptiness stretching outward, the plains surrounding the volcano, almost like an ocean of red sand. Every ridge, every fold, every shadow is a marker of time and force. The shuttle passes over a series of small ridges at the volcano's base. You see lines in the rock, evidence of lava that cooled and cracked, forming a lattice of patterns across the surface. Tiny dust trails shift in the wind, moving imperceptibly across smooth areas. You imagine running your hand along the hardened flows, feeling the roughness, the solidity, the weight of millions of years pressed into rock. You notice how the sunlight hits some flows at an angle, making them shimmer slightly, highlighting the difference between fresh and older surfaces. You feel a connection to the planet, seeing the evidence of volcanic history directly beneath you. As you follow the plateau, you notice the slopes of neighboring volcanoes. Each has its own character. Some rise sharply, others form long, gentle arcs. Calderas are visible, wide and flat, their edges fractured and weathered. You watch the lava channels extending downward, spreading into the surrounding plains, creating subtle ridges and depressions. The sunlight shifts as the shuttle moves, revealing hidden textures. You follow the path of a lava river for kilometers, tracing every curve and fold, imagining the flow moving slowly, carrying molten rock across the landscape. The detail fills your senses, giving a tangible sense of time, force, and movement. The shadows lengthen as the sun climbs higher. You see the slopes in relief, the patterns of cooling lava, the contrast between rough and smooth surfaces. You notice small debris along the flows, rocks that broke off as the lava cooled. Dust has settled in low spots, forming tiny ridges that ripple in faint lines. You lean closer, following each ridge, tracing the path of each flow with your eyes. You feel the scale pressing on you again, the emptiness, the vastness, the silent testimony of power that shaped the planet. Every detail matters. Every line tells a story of force, heat, and time, and you are there, absorbing it all. You shift your gaze to a distant ridge, noticing how it rises against the horizon. The slope is gradual, yet enormous. You imagine walking along it, feeling the uneven surface underfoot, the dry, hard rock pressing against your shoes. Shadows fall into the valleys beside it, creating contrast and depth. You follow the contours carefully, letting your eyes roam over every ridge and crevice. You feel the emptiness, the isolation, the quiet magnitude that makes Mars both beautiful and humbling. The shuttle glides forward, and your perspective changes continuously, revealing new angles and details with each movement. The volcanoes extend across the plateau, creating a network of high points and broad valleys. You notice how lava flows have merged in places, forming layered terrain. Some areas are smooth, others jagged, each telling a different story of eruption, cooling, and erosion. Dust drifts in faint trails across the surface, shifting slowly in the thin atmosphere. You lean your head close to the glass, tracing the line of a ridge, imagining your fingers following the contours, feeling the roughness, the solidity, the ancient power beneath. The sense of magnitude is overwhelming, yet quiet, a calm reminder of the planet's age and the forces that shaped it. You follow the slope of Pavonis Mons next. Its summit is far above the surrounding plains, and the gentle curve of its sides stretches outward. You notice faint textures along the lava flows, cracks, ridges, and smooth channels that tell a story of repeated eruptions. You imagine the slow build-up over millions of years, each eruption adding to the height, the width, the character of the volcano. Dust collects in depressions, shifting with every small gust of wind. You feel the rhythm of the landscape, the subtle interaction of lava, rock, and air that continues to shape the terrain even today. The shuttle drifts closer to Arzia Mons. Its caldera is large, flat, and fractured, edges broken where eruptions shape the surface. You notice tiny ridges and cracks along the rim, and small debris scattered along the slopes. Light catches these surfaces at angles, revealing depth and texture. You imagine standing there, feeling the uneven rock beneath your feet, listening to the faint wind brushing across the slopes, smelling the cold, dry air. Even though you are enclosed in the shuttle, your senses connect to the terrain, experiencing it as if you were on the ground, walking carefully across the ancient lava flows. You look across the Tharsis region as a whole. The volcanoes dominate the landscape, their sheer size dwarfing the plains around them. You notice how lava flows stretch for hundreds of kilometers, some smooth, some broken, forming a pattern across the plateau. Shadows from the rising sun stretch along the slopes, revealing hidden ridges and valleys. You feel the quiet magnitude of the place, the emptiness, the power of forces that shaped it. You sense the patience of Mars, the slow accumulation of layers, the shaping of terrain over millions of years, and the ongoing quiet work of wind and dust. The shuttle drifts along the slopes of the plateau. You notice details you might have missed from afar, small cracks in hardened lava, tiny ridges formed as molten rock cooled, subtle differences in color where dust has settled or rock has weathered. You follow a faint lava channel with your eyes, tracing it from summit to base, imagining the flow of molten rock that shaped the surface. You feel the rhythm of the landscape, the slow processes that continue to shape it, and the enormity of space and time reflected in every ridge, every slope, every shadow. You are suspended above it all, fully present, observing, feeling, and understanding the story Mars tells through its volcanoes and plains. The shuttle drifts forward, and your eyes catch movement across the plains below. At first, it is subtle, a faint haze lifting along the dune tops, drifting in delicate, swirling patterns. You lean forward, pressing your hand lightly against the window, and you see it clearly, a dust storm beginning to form. Tiny particles twist and rise from the surface, caught in invisible currents that sweep across the desert. You notice the color shift immediately. Where the dust lives, the red of the sand softens to a muted orange, blending with the pale ochres and greys of the surrounding plains. Shadows stretch and fade as sunlight filters through the fine haze. You feel the atmosphere in the shuttle, the faint movement as the craft adjusts gently, the soft creaks and shifts of metal as it glides above the stirring surface. You watch as the dust begins to swirl, forming small columns that drift slowly across low ridges. You imagine the thin air pushing the particles, lifting them just enough to create movement, enough to change the light, the texture, the appearance of the dunes below. The motion is mesmerizing. Each column twists in a way that seems almost deliberate, Yet it is entirely natural, the product of winds that have traveled across the planet for millennia. You feel yourself leaning closer, your eyes following the lines of dust as they curl and spiral, seeing the faint glimmer where sunlight catches individual grains. You feel the quiet energy of motion, subtle, almost invisible, yet present in every shifting shadow. The shuttle drifts further, and you notice more swirls forming in the distance. You see faint curtains of dust drifting down shallow valleys, tracing the shape of the terrain. Some areas glow in sunlight, while others remain muted in shadow, creating a patchwork of color that changes with every second. You feel a subtle tilt of the shuttle as it adjusts to the uneven air currents. The movement is gentle, almost imperceptible, but it gives you a sense of being alive with the planet, moving with the winds that you cannot feel directly. You notice how thin the atmosphere is here, how little resistance it offers, yet how it is enough to shape patterns, to lift particles, to create motion that alters the landscape visually. You focus on one swirl in particular. It rises slowly from a small dune, twisting upward in a delicate spiral. You imagine the particles moving, brushing past each other, catching sunlight at the edges, glinting faintly before falling back to the surface. You feel a sense of rhythm in the motion, a quiet pulse that seems to connect with the gentle vibration of the shuttle beneath your feet. You imagine stepping out, feeling the dust brushing your hand, light and cold, yet tangible in a way that reminds you of the presence of air, even in its scarcity. The storm is small, localized, but alive, dancing across the dunes below. The shuttle drifts along a shallow valley. You see dust clouds moving down the slopes, gathering in small pockets where the terrain forms subtle depressions. Light filters through the haze, giving the landscape a muted, almost golden tone. Shadows shift as the particles move, deepening in some areas, softening in others. You notice the faint reflection of dust in the sunlight, tiny glimmers that appear and disappear as the columns twist. You feel the quiet persistence of wind over time, sculpting the surface in a slow, deliberate pattern. You follow the movement for minutes, your mind tracing the paths of currents, imagining the invisible forces shaping each dune and valley. A wider area below begins to show multiple small dust devils. You lean closer to the glass, feeling the shuttle respond with the tiniest vibrations. Each column spins independently, lifting particles into faint spirals that move unpredictably yet with natural grace. The sun illuminates the dust, creating layers of light and shadow that shift continuously. You watch the trails that linger where the dust settles, tracing paths like brushstrokes across the red sand. You feel the texture in your mind, imagining the fine grains slipping past your fingers if you could reach out. The quiet, the scale, and the subtle motion combine to create a hypnotic scene that fills your senses completely. You notice the color of the plains changing as the dust moves. Where sunlight passes through lifted particles, the red sand softens, becoming almost pastel in tone. Shadows stretch and bend across the dunes, emphasizing shapes you did not notice before. You lean forward, tracking a column as it twists along a ridge, seeing tiny streaks of dust climb the slope, then settle, shifting the texture subtly. You feel the subtle sway of the shuttle again, a gentle adjustment as it glides over rising and falling terrain. The thin atmosphere allows for movement, but it is soft, almost dreamlike, and you feel connected to the quiet energy of Mars, present with every swirl, every glimmer, every shadow. You drift closer to a low hill. Dust rises along its slope in thin ribbons, lifting and curling as currents pass over the rock. You notice how small patterns emerge. Tiny eddies where the wind circulates, lifting dust unevenly, revealing the roughness beneath. Light catches these trails, emphasizing depth, and you follow the motion with your eyes. You imagine running your hand along the surface below, feeling the fine grit, the cooled rock, the subtle differences in texture caused by moving particles. Every visual detail gives you a sense of scale and movement, of the ongoing dance between the thin atmosphere and the surface it shapes. The shuttle drifts into a region where multiple faint storms intersect. You see curtains of dust overlapping, some rising higher, some closer to the ground. The colors shift continuously, from muted reds to pale oranges and ochres, highlighted by sunlight through the haze. Shadows stretch across dunes and depressions, revealing shapes you did not notice before. You feel the tiny vibrations of the shuttle as it adjusts to maintain altitude over the uneven terrain below. Each motion is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it adds to your sense of being part of the environment, moving with the swirling currents across the Martian surface. You focus on one long ridge. Dust rises along its slope in small streams, caught in swirling eddies. You trace a line of particles as it moves slowly down the side, following the slope until it reaches a depression where the grains settle. Light filters through the moving dust, casting a soft glow across the surface. Shadows shift and deepen, creating texture and depth. You feel the quiet energy of the motion, the slow sculpting of dunes and ridges by a wind that is subtle yet persistent. You lean closer to the window, following the movement carefully, imagining the motion continuing for hours, days, or even years, changing the landscape imperceptibly. The shuttle drifts past a small group of dust devils. They twist and spiral across a shallow plain, moving unpredictably yet gracefully. You notice the interaction between them, how they can merge, separate, or fade as the winds shift. The sunlight catches each column differently, highlighting the motion and creating a play of color and shadow across the sand. You imagine the air brushing your skin, thin and dry, carrying only the faintest movement of particles. You feel connected to the environment, part of the slow, patient process that continues to shape the Martian surface long after each impact and eruption. You sweep your gaze across a larger storm in the distance. The dust rises higher, forming a pale curtain that softens the features of the dunes beneath. Light passes through, creating a subtle haze that alters perception. Shadows shift continuously, emphasizing ridges and valleys that seemed flat from above. You imagine standing in the midst of this motion, feeling fine dust swirl past, the thin air barely offering resistance. You notice how delicate the patterns are, the faint lines of motion that leave temporary traces on the dunes below. You feel a sense of presence, being both observer and participant, connected to Mars through the subtle energy of wind and dust. The shuttle drifts over a valley where dust is concentrated in long streaks. You follow each trail with your eyes, noticing how the light emphasizes the curves and bends in the patterns. Small ripples in the sand beneath hint at microcurrents, showing the ongoing movement even in calm regions. You feel the vibration of the shuttle again, a gentle sway that mirrors the slow motion of the particles below. The thin atmosphere, almost invisible, allows the dust to move in a way that seems both delicate and persistent. You lean closer, tracing each line with your eyes, letting your senses absorb the quiet, constant shaping of the landscape. You notice the horizon beginning to blur slightly as the dust lifts in the distance. The plains take on a softer, muted color, shadows stretching across dunes and ridges, You feel a sense of calm as you observe, the motion hypnotic and deliberate. Tiny particles catch sunlight, glinting faintly before settling again. You follow a swirling column that moves along a dune, tracing its path until it disappears into the haze. You feel the connection to Mars, the slow, patient processes that shape every surface, the quiet force of wind and dust that is invisible yet undeniable. You are fully present, absorbing the motion, the light, the color, the texture, the quiet magnitude of a planet in motion. The shuttle glides forward, and your eyes are drawn immediately to a vast rift stretching across the Martian surface. Valles Marineris unfolds below, a canyon system so enormous it feels almost impossible to comprehend. You lean forward, pressing your hand lightly against the window, letting your eyes take in the vastness. The Titi Canyon stretches for thousands of kilometers, with cliffs rising steeply from the floor, jagged and irregular. Shadows cut across the walls, highlighting every fold and fracture. You trace the lines with your eyes, noticing layers of rock stacked upon each other, each layer a record of time, of climate, of forces that once shaped the planet. The depth presses on your mind as if you could feel the drop beneath you, stretching from rim to floor in a dizzying vertical scale. As you move closer, details emerge. The canyon walls are not uniform. Some cliffs rise sharply, others slope gently. Sedimentary layers reveal themselves in bands of color, pale ochres, rusty reds, muted grays, and soft browns. You follow the line of a layer, tracing it along the cliff face, noticing how it dips and twists, suggesting the slow deposition of material over millions of years. You imagine water flowing along these paths, carving valleys, carrying sediments, shaping the landscape. You lean forward, your breath held, as if you could feel the faint memory of water in the patterns of rock and dust. The shuttle drifts along a plateau above the canyon. You see tributary valleys feeding into the main rift, winding like dried rivers across the terrain. Dry gullies run down slopes, their curves suggesting the passage of liquid in the distant past. You follow one with your eyes, noticing how it narrows, then widens, the floor strewn with rock smoothed over time. You imagine water rushing here, carving channels, moving sediments, leaving behind traces that still whisper the story of a wetter Mars. The walls of the canyon reveal layers of sediment that catch the sunlight differently, some brighter, some darker, accentuating the contours and the history embedded in the rock. You shift your focus to the floor of Valles Marineris. It is wide and uneven, scattered with boulders and smaller rock formations. You notice ridges and depressions that suggest ancient flows, perhaps rivers that once moved slowly or quickly across this terrain. Shadows stretch along the canyon floor, emphasizing the vast drop from rim to bottom. You feel the sense of height and emptiness, imagining standing at the edge, looking down into a world carved by forces both immense and patient. The shuttle hums softly beneath you, but it is almost lost against the scale of the canyon, the silence of its space, and the enormity of time it represents. You glide along the cliff faces, following layered rock that tilts slightly in places. Each stratum seems to tell a story. You notice subtle differences in texture. Some layers are smooth and pale, others rough and dark. You imagine how water or wind might have deposited these sediments, layer upon layer, until the cliffs form the walls you see now. Tiny gullies snake down the slopes, some partially filled with dust, others leaving clean channels. You feel your senses sharpen, following every contour, imagining the movement of material, the silent shaping of a canyon that dwarfs any landscape on Earth. The shuttle turns slightly, giving you a new angle. Light and shadow play across the walls in a slow dance. You notice vertical fractures cutting through horizontal layers, evidence of stress, contraction, and planetary shifts over eons. The floor below is patchy with shadows from overhanging ridges. You trace a long gully with your eyes, imagining water flowing in the distant past, moving sediment, carving the valley deeper, smoothing the stones. You feel the depth in your body, imagining the drop from rim to floor, the scale of forces that once acted here, the quiet patience of the planet in preserving these forms for you to witness. Your attention is drawn to a bend in the canyon. The walls rise sharply, and sediment layers appear more pronounced. Pale and dark bands alternate, hinting at changes in composition and environment over time. You lean closer to the window, letting your eyes follow the lines. You can almost sense the weight of history pressing from each layer, each color, each subtle texture. Dust has settled in pockets, creating faint ripples that mark the slow movement of particles across time. You imagine standing there, hand on the rock, feeling the difference in hardness, in temperature, imagining the faint memory of flowing water still preserved in the patterns you see. The shuttle drifts over a tributary canyon. You notice the floor is smoother here, with faint, curving lines suggesting the passage of liquids. Small deposits of rock hint at sediment carried from higher slopes. You follow the winding path, tracing its origin high in the cliffs. Shadows emphasize the ridges, revealing depth and subtle variations in the rock. You feel the quiet patience of the landscape, the way it has held onto these forms for millions of years, preserving the traces of ancient activity. Every line, every curve, every texture is a clue to Mars' watery past, waiting for your attention and careful observation. You glance across to a wider expanse, where smaller canyons intersect with the main rift. You notice color differences more clearly now, subtle ochres and reds, darker bands of rock, lighter patches where dust has settled. You trace the ridges and depressions, following the paths of what could have been ancient water channels. You imagine the slow erosion over time, the movement of fine particles, the deposition of sediments layer by layer. You feel a quiet sense of awe, the enormity of time and scale settling in. The shuttle hums softly beneath you, but it seems almost a whisper compared to the grand story unfolding below. The canyon narrows in places, and you watch as cliffs rise even more sharply. Layers of rock tilt and fold slightly, evidence of tectonic stresses that shape the rift in addition to erosion. Shadows stretch across the floor, creating depth and texture. You follow small gullies running into the canyon, imagining water carving these paths, leaving behind sediment and smooth rocks. You feel your body respond to the scale, the empty space, the long drop to the floor. Each detail adds to your understanding, each subtle variation in color and texture telling you something about the ancient environment. You notice isolated patches of lighter rock along the canyon floor. You follow these with your eyes, seeing small ridges and deposits that may have formed from flowing water or frozen layers that later melted. You lean forward, tracing the lines of sediment along the walls, noticing faint folds, differences in hardness, color, and angle. Tiny boulders dot the floor, likely fallen from the cliffs above, evidence of erosion and gravity working slowly over millions of years. You imagine standing at the base, feeling the temperature difference between the sunlit floor and shaded walls, sensing the depth and enormity of the canyon from below. The shuttle drifts along another deep segment. The walls are tall and jagged, shadows carving, lines into every crevice. You trace the layers with your eyes, following bands that vary in thickness, color, and texture. Some appear pale, soft, and sandy, others dark and compacted. You notice tiny grooves running down the walls, likely carved by small flows of water or debris in the past. You feel a sense of connection to these forces, imagining the slow, patient shaping of each layer, each gully, each ridge. The canyon feels alive with history, and you are there to witness it, observing, absorbing, and sensing the vast timeline embedded in the rock. You watch a tributary merge into the main canyon. Its walls are steep, layered, and textured, with small pockets where dust has collected. You follow the dry channels with your eyes, imagining water once coursing through them, leaving behind sediment, shaping the rock, carving the path that is now frozen in time. Light filters through the canyon, highlighting ridges and depressions, creating a play of shadow and depth. You feel the immense scale, the emptiness, and the quiet patience of the planet. Every feature tells a story, and you trace each one carefully, feeling the weight of history in your body and mind. The shuttle drifts over a section where erosion has exposed deeper layers. You notice subtle differences in color and texture, pale bands alternating with darker, denser rock. You lean forward, tracing the lines, following the way the layers bend and fold. You imagine ancient floods or melting ice moving along these paths, shaping the walls and depositing sediments. Tiny dry gullies wind across the slopes, connecting ridges and pockets. You feel the enormity of time, the slow, unyielding shaping of the landscape, and the connection between observation and understanding. You are witnessing the memory of water on Mars, frozen in stone, visible only to careful eyes and patient attention. You drift along the canyon floor now, looking up at towering walls. Layers of sediment are visible in fine detail, each one a record of environmental change. Shadows stretch across depressions, highlighting textures you might have missed. You follow a narrow channel that twists along the floor, imagining water moving through it millions of years ago, carving its path. Rocks are scattered across the surface, some rounded, evidence of movement by liquid, others angular, fallen from cliffs. You feel the depth beneath you, the scale around you, and the quiet energy of forces that acted long before any human presence. The canyon is alive in your mind, filled with the history of Mars, waiting for your senses to absorb every detail. The shuttle tilts gently, and your eyes are drawn toward the distant horizon, where the red plains begin to fade into a pale, shimmering white. You realize you are approaching the Martian North Pole. The color shift is striking. The endless ochre sands of the desert give way to bright reflective ice, stretching in vast sheets. You lean close to the window, letting your hand brush lightly against the glass, feeling the subtle vibration of the shuttle as it glides over the frozen surface. The ice shines under the low sun, bright and almost blinding in contrast to the deep reds and oranges of the southern plains. You notice small ridges and fractures across the cap, patterns that suggest movement, sublimation, and the slow sculpting of ice over time. The surface is not uniform. You follow a series of faint streaks that wind across the ice, subtle lines that mark variations in thickness or recent shifts in the frozen layers. You imagine the processes at work here. The ice is not just frozen water. Carbon dioxide ice, dry ice, forms seasonally, adding layers and creating temporary frost that evaporates directly into the thin atmosphere. You see areas where the ice is smooth and continuous, and others where dust has accumulated, giving the surface faint ochre hints, like reminders of the desert that surrounds the pole. You feel the quiet magnitude of the scene, the extreme contrast between frozen stillness and the deserts you left behind. You drift closer to the edge of a polar plateau. Shadows stretch across the ice, revealing subtle undulations, small ridges, and shallow depressions. You notice the sunlight glinting off raised edges, highlighting the crystalline surface. You follow the contours of a shallow valley in the ice, imagining how it forms during seasonal cycles. You sense the cold indirectly through the contrast with the warmer plains below. Even through the shuttle's sealed cabin, you feel the difference, the crisp, dry air of the high-latitude surface. The way light behaves differently over reflective ice versus dusty desert sand. The shuttle glides over a large expanse where seasonal frost is sublimating. You see faint wisps of gas lifting from the surface, too thin to see clearly, yet enough to shift the subtle shadows on the ice. You follow a line where frost has recently disappeared, the surface beneath darker and slightly rougher. You imagine the tilt of Mars creating long seasonal cycles, how the polar regions receive different amounts of sunlight throughout the year, leading to accumulation and loss of ice. You feel the passage of time, billions of years compressed into subtle patterns on the surface, a silent record of seasonal change. You notice a contrast in texture across the ice cap. Some areas are smooth, almost mirror-like, reflecting the pale sunlight in wide sweeps. Others are rough, broken by cracks, ridges, and small pits where sublimation has removed material. You follow a line of fractures, tracing the pattern as it twists and turns across the surface. The color shifts slightly where dust has collected along the ridges, muted reds and grays against bright white. You imagine walking here, feeling the crisp, hard surface beneath your feet, hearing the soft crunch of dust mixed with ice, sensing the thinness of the air as your breath expands slowly and lightly in the frozen environment. The shuttle drifts further, giving you a wider perspective. The polar ice extends endlessly, merging with faint hills and small ridges that rise gently above the surface. You notice the edges of layered ice deposits, faint lines that indicate previous seasons of accumulation. Shadows stretch across these layers, revealing subtle depth, almost like a frozen staircase descending into the planet itself. You follow a ridge with your eyes, noticing where light catches the edges of raised ice, emphasizing the contrast with shadowed troughs. The effect is hypnotic, a quiet crystalline landscape that shifts imperceptibly as the shuttle moves. You watch a small depression in the ice cap. It is shallow, but reveals subtle differences in color and texture. You see hints of dust mixed with the frozen water and carbon dioxide layers, creating faint streaks that hint at underlying processes. Sunlight strikes at a low angle, casting long shadows that emphasize depth and curvature. You imagine standing at the edge, feeling the smooth ice under your hand, the faint ridges of accumulated frost, and the crisp, cold air brushing past. You sense the scale, the silence, the extreme stillness that dominates the polar environment, so different from the deserts you flew over earlier. The shuttle drifts along a broad expanse where ice and dust intermingle. You notice faint ripple patterns, subtle undulations caused by wind and sublimation cycles. Shadows stretch across these ridges, highlighting texture and form. You trace the path of a tiny fracture, following it as it twists, widens and narrows. You feel your senses engage with the scene, imagining the slow, patient motion of ice changing over seasons, the rise and fall of frost, the subtle lift of particles as carbon dioxide sublimates into the thin air. Every line, every ridge, every glimmer in the sunlight tells a story of movement and persistence over millions of years. You follow the sunlit edge of the ice cap. The contrast with the adjacent plains is dramatic. The red sands below are dull in comparison to the brilliance above. You see patches where ice is partially covered with dust, giving a muted reflection. You follow a line where seasonal frost has begun to recede, revealing darker underlying layers. You imagine the slow cycles of accumulation and loss, the tilt of Mars dictating how sunlight reaches the poles, and the long-term effect on ice thickness. You feel the subtle motion of the shuttle as it adjusts altitude, a faint echo of the natural processes unfolding below. You notice small ridges of ice casting long shadows in the low sunlight. The edges are sharp in some areas, rounded in others, evidence of erosion, sublimation, and minor deposition of dust. You follow the ridges with your eyes, tracing them across the horizon, imagining standing at the base, feeling the cold beneath your boots, sensing the still air and faint whisper of sublimation currents. Light reflects differently across the surface, shifting as the shuttle moves, giving you a sense of the fine texture of the ice and the subtle variations in height across the cap. The entire scene feels alive, yet calm, a frozen record of time and seasonal rhythm. You drift over a large plateau of white ice. You notice the gentle slope down toward the surrounding plains, the gradual merging of reflective surfaces into muted reds and browns. Shadows stretch along cracks and ridges, revealing hidden contours and depth. You follow the path of a faint gully carved by seasonal melt or sublimation, tracing it from top to bottom. You imagine water moving very slowly, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, leaving traces that remain faint but readable today. You feel the magnitude of history preserved in frozen form, a patient landscape holding memory in every subtle detail. The shuttle glides over smaller ice formations at the edge of the cap. You see patches of frost forming intricate patterns along cracks, small ridges of sublimated carbon dioxide forming delicate lines. Light plays across these surfaces, casting a soft glow and emphasizing the difference between smooth ice and rougher, dust-laden areas. You follow the undulations with your eyes, imagining the slow seasonal build-up and loss of ice, the way each cycle leaves a mark, a subtle transformation. You feel the quiet energy, the patient shaping, the immense stillness that defines the polar regions. The shuttle drifts further, giving you a sweeping view of the northern ice cap. You notice variations in color and texture, bright white reflecting the sun, paler shades tinged with gray or faint red where dust has accumulated. Shadows stretch across ridges and valleys, emphasizing depth. You trace lines of ancient channels, imagining water that may have pooled or flowed in past climates. You feel a connection to the seasonal cycle, the tilt of Mars, and the long-term changes that sculpt the polar landscape. The scene is immense, calm, and hypnotic, filling your senses with scale, light, and stillness. You follow the edge of a smooth ice plateau, noting small fractures that run across the surface. Light glints along raised edges, highlighting the subtle texture of the frozen layers. You notice tiny accumulations of dust along the cracks, giving contrast to the bright ice. You imagine the cold air brushing against your face, the thin atmosphere allowing little resistance, yet carrying faint currents that shift particles subtly over time. You feel the scale and quiet persistence of the processes shaping the polar region, the interplay of frost, sublimation, and seasonal cycles, leaving a delicate fingerprint across the landscape. You drift over the ice cap, taking in its full expanse. The bright surface stretches toward the horizon, merging into faint hills and ridges. Shadows move slowly across depressions and cracks, revealing the depth and texture of the frozen layers. You trace the patterns of sublimation, noticing where carbon dioxide ice has lifted or disappeared, and where water ice remains solid and bright. You feel a sense of stillness, a patient, frozen rhythm that has persisted for millions of years. The contrast with the deserts below, the reds and browns of Martian sand, is stark, and it emphasizes the variety and complexity of the planet's surface. You sweep your gaze across the horizon, following ridges, shallow valleys, and undulating ice sheets. You notice how light falls differently across surfaces, illuminating ridges while leaving depressions in shadow. You feel the thinness of the atmosphere, the quiet hum of the shuttle beneath you, and the reflective brilliance of ice spreading in every direction. You trace subtle lines and fractures with your eyes, imagining the patient processes that formed each layer, each ridge, each subtle variation. You are fully present, observing the frozen rhythms of the Martian pole, feeling the scale, the cold, and the silence in your body and mind. The shuttle dips slightly, and your eyes are drawn to a delicate network of small valleys and ridges stretching across the Martian surface. These are subtle features, easy to miss from higher altitudes, yet they reveal the quiet energy that has shaped Mars over millions of years. You lean close to the window, pressing your hand against the cool glass, feeling the faint vibration of the shuttle as it glides above. Your gaze follows a narrow valley, its floor lightly dusted with fine particles, winding gently between low ridges. You notice the shadow lines cast along the edges, giving depth and texture to the scene. Each ridge, each trough, seems to have a story, a subtle signature of wind, dust, and ancient water. You drift closer to one small canyon, tracing the floor with your eyes. Tiny ripples in the sand suggest the slow, ongoing movement of particles. You see faint trails where wind has shifted grains, forming miniature dunes that resemble the larger deserts you passed earlier, yet delicate and precise. You follow a line along the valley wall, noticing scratches and grooves in exposed rock, the subtle marks of erosion over countless years. You feel yourself drawn into the patterns, imagining running your fingers along the rough surfaces, feeling the cold rock, the dry grit, the faint texture left by persistent winds. The shuttle glides along a ridge, and your attention is captured by a patch of slightly darker rock. You lean forward, letting your eyes explore every crevice. Tiny cracks run across the surface, and small stones are scattered unevenly. You imagine the aeolian forces at work, particles lifted by wind, slowly abrading the rock, shaping it imperceptibly. Each tiny groove, each irregularity in texture tells you something about Mars's ongoing surface evolution. You feel the subtle vibration of the shuttle echoing this patient movement, a quiet resonance between human engineering and planetary process. You drift over a series of low hills. You notice faint curved lines along their slopes, soft undulations created by gentle winds pushing sand and dust. You trace the patterns carefully, noticing how they shift as the shuttle moves, how shadows highlight the subtle curves. The sand is muted red, blending with pale greys and ochres of underlying rock. You imagine tiny grains catching sunlight, reflecting it briefly before settling back into the surface. You feel a connection to the persistent shaping of the planet, the slow sculpting that occurs without noise, without drama, but with a patient consistency that spans millennia. The shuttle turns slightly, giving you a new angle. You see a shallow depression filled with faint ripples of sand, traces of small-scale dune activity. You follow each ripple with your eyes, noticing subtle differences in height, in color, in the angle of light. Shadows deepen along ridges, revealing hidden detail. You feel your awareness sharpen, tracing the minutiae of Mars' surface, like a map of quiet forces at work. You imagine standing here, feeling the movement of fine dust under your feet, the faint resistance of grains shifting with each step. You feel the patient energy that has slowly shaped valleys, ridges, and dunes, layer by layer, year by year, century by century. You glide over a gently sloping valley, noticing variations in rock texture. Some surfaces are smooth, worn by wind over millennia. Others are rough, broken into jagged fragments. You follow a small outcrop, seeing tiny fractures and subtle layering. Dust has settled unevenly, highlighting the contours. You imagine the process. Wind-lifting particles, brushing against rock, abrading surfaces, forming faint streaks, moving slowly but persistently. You feel the scale of time compressed into the smallest details, the patient erosion that continues without pause, shaping Mars in ways almost invisible from a distance. The shuttle drifts over a small ridge where the sun catches the surface at a low angle. Shadows stretch along the uneven terrain, revealing undulations that might be missed in brighter light. You lean closer, letting your gaze sweep over the area, following the lines of minor gullies, noticing variations in color and texture. Dust has formed faint streaks, dark against pale rock. You imagine tiny grains moving in invisible currents, pushed by winds that are barely perceptible. You feel the quiet rhythm of motion, the way aeolian forces sculpt the surface patiently and consistently over eons. You pass a shallow valley that narrows slightly, flanked by small hills. The floor is dotted with tiny rocks, some rounded, some angular, evidence of movement and breakage over time. You follow a small gully running along the slope, imagining water that may have flowed here long ago, leaving behind sediment and shaping the contours of the valley. Shadows deepen along the walls, emphasizing the texture and undulations. You feel a sense of scale, understanding that even minor valleys hold clues to Mars's history, to forces that work slowly but powerfully to sculpt the surface. The shuttle drifts along a plain dotted with subtle mounds and depressions. You notice faint streaks of lighter sand, traces of small windswept dunes, tiny shifts that occur imperceptibly over time. You follow the lines with your eyes, tracing the movement of particles and the delicate balance of erosion and deposition. Each detail seems to carry its own story, a patient record of wind, dust, and gravity interacting over millions of years. You feel your senses attuned to these small features, noticing even the faintest variations in slope and texture. You sweep your gaze across a series of low ridges. Shadows play across their surfaces, revealing rough textures and faint striations. Dust has accumulated in pockets, highlighting subtle differences. You follow a tiny valley between ridges, imagining how wind might lift sand, deposit it, shift small particles along the slope. You feel the patient passage of time, the quiet work of Mars's atmosphere shaping every detail of these minor geological features, even when invisible to casual observation. You lean forward, tracing each line and curve carefully, absorbing the quiet complexity of the landscape. The shuttle drifts over a shallow gully network. You notice the fine layering of rock along its edges, the faint accumulation of dust and sand along the floor. You follow a small ridge where wind has carved a smooth line, eroding rougher rock over millennia. You imagine the slow shaping of every feature, the interplay of erosion and deposition, the subtle power of aeolian activity. You feel yourself part of this observation, present with every micro detail, every shadow, every ripple in the sand that hints at movement and change. You glide over a patch of faint depressions and undulations. You notice how the light strikes low areas differently from raised surfaces, emphasizing subtle texture. Tiny, wind-blown ripples cross the depressions, forming delicate patterns. You follow a small ridge with your eyes, seeing tiny fractures and dust streaks. You imagine the persistent shaping of the surface, how small forces accumulate over vast time scales to create intricate geological features. You feel a quiet awe at the patient artistry of nature. The shuttle moves along a narrow valley flanked by small ridges. You notice streaks of pale dust along the slopes, highlighting the direction of subtle winds. Tiny rocks dot the floor, some appearing worn, others freshly fractured. You follow the lines of erosion, tracing how particles have shifted over time. You feel the quiet rhythm of the landscape, the invisible motion that sculpts Mars' surface slowly but relentlessly. Your senses are fully engaged, observing, tracing, and imagining every micro-feature. You sweep across a field of low mounds. You notice faint channels connecting small depressions, subtle curvatures carved by wind or ancient water flow. Shadows emphasize depth and slope. You follow each ridge carefully, imagining the particle movement that created it. You feel the patience of geological processes, the imperceptible yet constant shaping of Mars, the way small features carry the memory of wind, dust, and time. Each ripple, each line, each variation in color is a record of ongoing change. You glide over a tiny network of gullies. You see the faint layering of sediments along the sides, dust accumulation highlighting subtle angles. Tiny rocks scatter across the floor. You follow a small slope where wind has shifted sand into delicate curves. You feel the quiet motion of particles, the persistent erosion, and deposition that continues even in these minor valleys. You sense the patient energy of Mars, shaping details too small to notice from afar, yet carrying the history of wind, ice, and dust. The shuttle drifts over a shallow depression surrounded by low ridges. You notice delicate patterns of the light and shadow along its edges. Dust and sand have formed faint ripples, tiny dunes that appear almost alive in their subtle motion. You trace each line carefully, following the subtle curvatures. You imagine the slow passage of wind over millennia, shifting particles, shaping edges, leaving a record of persistent but gentle forces. You feel a connection to the micro-scale history of the planet, the quiet artistry of aeolian processes revealed in every detail. The shuttle glides along another narrow valley. You notice faint ridges along the slopes, tiny fractures in rock, subtle differences in texture and color. You follow a small channel running along the floor, imagining water or wind slowly carving this path. Shadows deepen in depressions, highlighting each undulation. You feel the subtle sense of scale, the quiet magnitude of features that seem minor but record millions of years of activity. Every micro detail is alive with history, waiting for your attentive observation. You sweep across a wide area of low ridges and shallow valleys. You notice patterns of erosion, faint streaks of sand and dust, tiny ripples across smooth rock surfaces. Light plays across the scene, emphasizing subtle curves and slopes. You trace the lines with your eyes, imagining wind and dust sculpting the surface slowly, patiently, persistently. You feel immersed in the quiet evolution of Mars, attuned to the subtle movements that continue to shape every ridge, every valley, and every dune. The shuttle tilts slightly as you drift toward the western horizon, and your eyes catch the first hints of color spreading across the Martian sky. The sun is low, near the edge of the planet, casting a warm, soft glow that paints the desert plains in gentle hues. Reds deepen to rust, oranges fade into pale gold, and faint purples creep along the distant ridges. You feel the quiet shift in light filling the cabin, a gentle warmth brushing against your skin through the windows. The shuttle rocks, slightly, a calm motion that echoes the planet's serene vastness, and you notice how every shadow stretches and shifts as the sun sinks slowly toward the horizon. You lean closer to the window, letting your eyes sweep over the dunes below. The ripples you observed earlier now cast long, intricate shadows that reveal subtle details you might have missed before. Each dune appears to have its own personality, ridges curving and twisting, slopes catching light differently. You follow a line along a dune crest, noticing how the shadow on the far side deepens the contours. The effect is hypnotic. You can almost sense the thin Martian wind brushing across the surface, lifting fine particles, moving them gently along the ridges. The play of light and shadow transforms the desert into a living map of texture and time. The horizon stretches endlessly. You notice small craters catching the last rays of the sun. Their rims cast elongated shadows across the plains, and you trace the relief with your eyes. Shallow depressions that seem subtle in full daylight now appear dramatic and deep. You follow the contours of a larger crater, watching how the layers of sediment and rock are highlighted by the low sun. Light glints off pale streaks within the crater, accentuating ridges, and you feel your senses absorb the scale and subtle detail. The long shadows emphasize the quiet history of impacts, of dust accumulation, of aeolian processes slowly shaping every edge. The sky above transitions, deepening from pale pink near the horizon to soft violet higher up. You notice tiny streaks of cloud or dust catching the fading light, adding texture to the gradient. The shuttle rocks gently, a calm, deliberate motion, almost as if you are floating alongside the planet itself. You sense the warmth from the panels, glowing subtly in the low light, contrasting with the cool, thin air outside. You let your gaze drift across the landscape, noticing the gentle undulations of dunes, the low ridges, the distant mesas now silhouetted in the waning sun. You feel immersed, fully present, every detail tangible, every shadow significant. You follow the edge of a shallow canyon. The sun has dipped low enough that shadows extend far across the floor, revealing every subtle groove and fold. You trace the lines of erosion, following tiny gullies and ridges illuminated only by the soft, oblique light. Small rocks cast elongated silhouettes, revealing rough surfaces and delicate textures. You imagine walking along the canyon floor at this hour, feeling the soft dust beneath your feet, sensing the chill in the air, and the warm glow of sunlight across your skin. The interplay of light and shadow emphasizes the depth and complexity of the terrain in ways daylight never could. The shuttle drifts over a region of intersecting valleys. You notice the slopes bathed in a gradient of color, deep reds blending into muted purples and soft oranges. Shadows stretch across ridges and depressions, exaggerating the relief of subtle features. You follow a narrow gully with your eyes, noticing how the light shifts as the shuttle glides, revealing textures and contours that were invisible moments ago. You sense the quiet patience of Mars, the way light can transform a landscape, revealing hidden details, guiding your attention to nuances in shape, slope, and pattern. You feel fully present in this moment, observing, tracing, absorbing. You glance toward a series of small dunes. The soft glow of sunset illuminates the crests, while the shadows stretch across the troughs, creating a rhythmic pattern across the desert floor. You follow a line of tiny ripples along a dune face, noticing how the oblique light catches each grain differently, revealing delicate curves and angles. You sense the movement of the shuttle beneath you, the gentle hum, the quiet rocking, and the warm light brushing across your face. Every ridge, every subtle depression, every particle of sand becomes visible in a new way, a dance of light and shadow that transforms the familiar into something extraordinary. The sun sinks further, and the horizon glows with a deep, diffuse red. You watch as distant ridges soften in color, fading into dusky purples. The shuttle glides over a broad plain where small craters and ridges create a complex patchwork of shadows. You trace each contour, following lines of erosion, deposits, and ridges illuminated in dramatic relief. Faint dust clouds catch the last rays of light, glowing briefly before fading into the darkening landscape. You feel the quiet motion of the planet, the subtle energy of shifting dust, and the patient history embedded in every line and shadow. You drift over a series of mesas now silhouetted against the vivid sky. The light is low enough that subtle features emerge from shadow, small outcrops, faint ridges, tiny depressions. You follow the patterns carefully, noticing how each slope catches what remains of sunlight. You sense the depth, imagining the long drop from crest to plain below. Shadows stretch and twist, emphasizing every fold and undulation. You feel connected to the landscape, your eyes and mind tracing the slow, deliberate shaping that has occurred over eons. The sky darkens further, moving from deep red to soft violet, then to muted purple. You notice faint streaks across the horizon, thin layers of dust or clouds catching the last light. You follow a shallow valley, the ridges highlighted by the subtle glow. You lean slightly forward, tracing every groove and fold with your eyes. Tiny rocks cast long, delicate shadows, revealing small undulations in the terrain. You imagine the quiet forces, wind, dust, minor erosion, that continue shaping these features, imperceptibly but persistently. You feel your senses attuned to both the macro and micro scales of the landscape, noticing every detail illuminated in the shifting light. The shuttle drifts across a low plateau. Shadows stretch across the surface, revealing small ridges and subtle depressions. You follow a line along a dune edge, noticing how tiny ripples catch the last light. Dust sparkles faintly where the sunlight strikes at an angle. You sense the thinness of the atmosphere, the quiet hum of the shuttle, and the warmth of fading sunlight brushing against panels and window frames. You feel a heightened awareness, fully present as the shifting glow of twilight reveals hidden details across the landscape. You pass a shallow crater. The oblique light from the setting sun stretches the rim into long, dramatic shadows. You follow the contours carefully, tracing subtle variations in slope, small ridges along the floor, and faint channels carved by wind. Shadows emphasize depth, revealing textures that were invisible moments ago. You imagine standing at the edge, feeling the cool air, the faint warmth of the sun on your face, and the vast emptiness of the Martian plain stretching endlessly below. You sense the interplay of light and shadow as a quiet storyteller, revealing the intricate details of the planet. You drift over a gentle ridge. Shadows from small dunes stretch across the surface like delicate brushstrokes. You notice subtle variations in sand texture, slight undulations, and faint lines tracing wind patterns. The warm glow of the sun touches your skin through the window, contrasting with the coolness of the cabin. You follow each shadow carefully, tracing the contours of ridges, small depressions, and subtle rock outcrops. The interplay of light and topography transforms the landscape, revealing depth and hidden shapes. You feel the quiet rhythm of the planet, patient and persistent, shaping every small detail over time. The sun dips further, painting the horizon in deep reds and muted purples. You follow a faint gully that cuts across a small plateau. Shadows emphasize every subtle ridge and depression. Tiny rocks dot the surface, casting elongated silhouettes. You trace the path carefully with your eyes, imagining the long history of wind, dust, and minor erosion that shaped it. You feel the quiet hum of the shuttle, the gentle rocking, and the immersive glow of twilight illuminating every ridge, dune, and hollow. Each subtle feature becomes vivid, alive, and meaningful. You drift over a shallow canyon, the edges highlighted by the last light of the sun. Shadows stretch across the floor, revealing small ridges, outcrops, and tiny gullies. You trace the contours, noticing subtle differences in slope and texture. Dust and sand collect along low edges, catching the fading light. You feel the patient shaping of the landscape, the quiet power of Mars' surface forces, and your own senses fully engaged in observing the interplay of shadow, light, and texture. Every ridge, every hollow, every curve is a record of history, revealed now in the calm of twilight. The shuttle glides over a broad plain, the sun dipping below the horizon, leaving behind a deep red and purple sky. Shadows lengthen dramatically, emphasizing every subtle fold in the dunes and ridges. You follow faint tracks of dust movement, tiny ripple patterns, and minor depressions. The interplay of warm sunlight and encroaching shadow transforms the familiar landscape into something new, a quiet spectacle of color and form. You feel the gentle rocking of the shuttle, the warmth across your hands and face, and the immersive drama of Mars's twilight stretching endlessly before you. You pass a series of small mesas, their tops catching the fading light, while sides are cast in deep shadow. You follow the subtle variations in slope, the small gullies, the intricate textures of wind-eroded surfaces. Dust and sand have formed delicate streaks along the edges. You imagine the slow accumulation of particles, the erosion of rock, the patient shaping of the landscape over millions of years. You feel fully present, observing every detail, tracing shadows, textures, and subtle undulations as twilight transforms the Martian desert into a canvas of deep color and quiet magnitude. You drift along a low dune field. Shadows stretch across the troughs, revealing ripple patterns in the sand. You trace each line with your eyes, noticing subtle differences in height and orientation. The warm glow of the fading sun touches the top of each ridge, highlighting delicate curves. You feel the slow rocking of the shuttle beneath you, the quiet hum, the immersive effect of light and shadow revealing hidden ridges and valleys across the Martian landscape. You are fully engaged, tracing every detail, feeling the scale, depth, and subtle drama of twilight. The shuttle begins a gentle climb, and you feel a slight tug beneath your feet as it lifts you higher above the Martian surface. You look down, and the deserts stretch endlessly beneath you, now softened by the fading light of twilight. The colors shift subtly as the sun sinks lower, ochres and reds blending into muted purples and soft shadows. You follow the curve of a dune field, tracing the ripples across the sand one last time. Every ridge, every hollow, Every faint trail of dust seems to carry the history of millions of years. You feel the quiet solitude of Mars pressing in, a calm emptiness that is vast and persistent. You sweep your gaze across a familiar crater. From this height, the floor is now a patchwork of light and shadow. The central peak catches the remaining rays of sunlight, glowing softly against the dimming plain. You notice subtle details, the layering of sediments along the walls, tiny ridges along the slopes, faint traces of dust that have accumulated in quiet pockets. You trace these features with your eyes, imagining the force of ancient impacts that created them, the slow movement of particles over eons. You feel connected to the planet's story, a silent narrative written in stone and sand. The shuttle glides over the volcanic plains you visited earlier. Olympus Mons rises faintly below, massive even from this altitude. You see its caldera rim, dark against the paler plains around it. Lava flows etched into the surface like frozen rivers. You follow the lines with your eyes, noting the subtle cracks, the gentle slopes, the shadows that reveal depth. You imagine the immense eruptions that built this mountain, the slow cooling of lava, and the quiet shaping of volcanic terrain over millions of years. You feel the scale pressing in, the enormity of Mars's geological history, the patient forces that have crafted every ridge, valley, and crater. You drift past smaller volcanoes and shield flows. Each one has its own pattern of ridges and fissures, subtle textures in the cooled rock. You follow tiny fractures with your eyes, imagining wind slowly shifting dust across the surfaces, smoothing some areas, highlighting others. Light falls obliquely, emphasizing the relief, the undulating shapes, the quiet motion of shadow creeping across the land. You feel your senses sharpen, noting each difference in color, each subtle pattern, each line that speaks to the planet's volcanic past. You are present in this vast, silent laboratory, observing the ongoing interaction between rock, dust, and wind. The shuttle arcs gently, giving you a sweeping view of the plains below. Faint valleys, small ridges, and shallow craters stretch toward the horizon. You notice subtle color differences, reds, browns, and soft ochres interspersed with pale streaks of dust. Shadows lengthen, creating depth and contrast. You follow a narrow gully, tracing its course across the plain, imagining water that may have flowed here long ago, leaving traces of sediment and shaping the terrain. You feel the immense quiet, the patient rhythm of Mars's geological forces continuing even as you move away. You drift higher, and the details below begin to soften. The deserts become vast, muted plains, the ripples of dunes blending into smooth swaths of color. Craters shrink, volcanic flows lose their sharpness, and subtle ridges fade into gentle undulations. You follow the curve of the horizon, noting how the planet's surface extends endlessly beneath you, a quiet tapestry of geological history. You feel a gentle detachment, a sense of moving away while still holding every observation in your mind, tracing patterns with your memory, even as they recede visually. The shuttle glides over a series of shallow valleys and minor ridges. From above, you can see the alignment of small features, the faint streaks left by wind, and the subtle layering of rock exposed along slopes. Shadows are long now, and the low light emphasizes textures differently, revealing hidden reliefs and gentle slopes. You follow each subtle line carefully, tracing the interaction of dust, rock, and aeolian processes. You feel the quiet power of these forces, shaping the planet in imperceptible ways over immense timescales. You sweep over the northern ice cap once more, seeing it as a bright reflective patch in the distance, The white ice contrasts sharply with the surrounding deserts, and you notice the faint fractures and ridges still visible even from this altitude. Shadows lengthen across the surface, emphasizing the subtle undulations you observed up close. You feel a quiet sense of continuity, the ice patiently recording seasonal cycles, the deserts below retaining the marks of wind, dust, and time. You sense Mars as a living archive. Each surface features a record of climate, geology, and the patient passage of years. The shuttle drifts over an expansive crater field. From this height, even small impacts are visible as subtle depressions with soft rims. You notice the interplay of shadow and light, how each crater's floor and wall are revealed differently as the sun fades. You follow lines of ejecta gently spread across the plains, imagining the force of impact that created them. You feel a sense of reverence for the planet's violent past, tempered by the calm silence that dominates the present. Every crater, every ridge, every depression tells a story, and you are able to witness it all in this quiet, immersive moment. You glide over a series of dunes and plains, the last traces of sunlight casting a gentle glow across the surface. You notice subtle variations in sand color, faint ripple patterns, and low ridges that create quiet shadows. You trace each curve with your eyes, imagining the slow motion of particles, the gentle shaping of dunes by wind over centuries. The shuttle rocks softly beneath you, the engines humming a steady, low tone. You feel the scale of Mars pressing gently around you, vast, quiet, and eternal. The horizon begins to darken as twilight deepens. Faint purples and reds blend into muted greys, and you notice the first hints of stars appearing overhead. The shuttle climbs slowly, giving you a wider perspective. Deserts, craters, volcanoes, and valleys stretch out in every direction, now unified, under the soft, fading light. You feel the magnitude of the planet's solitude, the quiet patience of geological processes, and the calm majesty of this alien world. You observe patterns of erosion, layering, and dust deposition fading gently beneath you. The planet's stories continuing silently in the thin atmosphere. You drift above a broad plain, noting how subtle details are softened with altitude. Dune ripples merge into sweeping textures. Small ridges fade into gentle slopes, and shallow craters blend with surrounding terrain. You follow faint streaks of dust moving along the surface, carried by invisible winds. You sense the continuity of time, the persistent shaping of Mars by quiet, constant forces. The shuttle hums softly, vibrating slightly as it moves higher. You feel the vast emptiness surrounding you, a calm immersion into scale, time, and space. You pass over a series of low volcanic flows. From this height, the edges of lava plains appear as soft contours, smooth and expansive. Shadows fall gently along subtle ridges and minor fractures. You imagine the ancient eruptions that formed these features, the slow cooling and settling of lava, and the persistent shaping by wind and dust since then. You feel the patient rhythm of the planet, the way Mars holds its history in every surface feature, silent yet profound. You sense your presence as both observer and participant, your attention fully absorbed in the vastness below. The shuttle drifts across small craters and minor valleys, details softening with distance. You notice the faint outlines of ancient riverbeds, subtle erosion patterns, and traces of wind action. Light falls obliquely across low ridges, emphasizing gentle relief. You follow the lines with your eyes, tracing history and form simultaneously. The engines hum gently, the cabin warm and quiet. You feel a deep awareness of Mars' scale, the patient persistence of its forces, and the quiet beauty of a planet shaped over billions of years. Every ridge, every depression, every dune becomes a lasting impression on your senses. You glance back toward Olympus Mons and surrounding volcanic features. From here, the peaks rise faintly above the plains, shadows stretching across lower terrain. You trace the lava flows, ridges, and calderas, feeling the immense scale and solitude. The desert and cratered plains stretch endlessly, their patterns fading gently as you gain altitude. You notice how subtle variations in color, texture, and shadow remain visible even from this height. You feel the quiet majesty of the planet, a patient witness to time, erosion, and deposition, and you let these impressions linger in your mind. The shuttle arcs gently, giving you a final sweeping view of Martian deserts, ice caps, craters, and valleys. Details fade with altitude, but the textures and patterns remain, imprinted in your perception. You sense the slow, deliberate motion of the shuttle, the soft hum of the engines, the vast emptiness surrounding you. The planet below feels eternal, patient, and quiet, holding every ridge, dune, crater, and ice sheet in timeless equilibrium. You feel a sense of completion, a quiet connection to Mars' geological story and the immersive journey you have shared with it. The shuttle climbs steadily, and the surface stretches further, colors softening into muted reds, ochres, and pale purples. Shadows fade gently, ridges and valleys blend into sweeping plains, and the planet's vastness surrounds you completely. You reflect on the quiet solitude, the patient forces that shaped every detail, and the immense scale of history recorded in stone, sand, and ice. You feel a soft resonance in your body, the hum of engines blending with the memory of textures, shadows, and light, a sensory record of Mars itself. You let your gaze drift across the horizon one last time, absorbing every impression before it recedes into the distance. The shuttle reaches its final altitude for departure. You notice the tiniest details fading beneath you. Dunes, craters, minor ridges, and channels merging into gentle swaths of color and texture. You feel the gentle rocking slow, the engines hum softly in steady rhythm, the vastness of space opening around you. The surface below remains etched in memory, a quiet record of aeolian activity, erosion, volcanic flows, ice cycles, and ancient water. You feel the connection between observation, science, and personal presence, a calm awareness of having truly seen, felt, and understood the planet in all its quiet majesty. The last rays of sunlight disappear from the horizon. Colors fade to muted reds, soft purples, and dusky grays. You feel the gentle ascent, the final disengagement from the surface, the shuttle floating steadily in the thin atmosphere above. The quiet hum of engines, the vast emptiness around you, the lingering impressions of dunes, craters, ice, and volcanoes fill your senses. You let your mind absorb the totality of the journey, the patient forces, the scale, the beauty, and the solitude. You breathe slowly, feeling the planet's story etched in your awareness, a calm and lasting impression of Mars's quiet deserts, ancient history, and eternal patience. You close your eyes briefly, letting every detail, every shadow, every subtle shift of light, every ridge, dune, crater, and ice formation settle in your mind. You feel the warmth of the cabin, the gentle vibration of the shuttle, and the immense emptiness surrounding you. You imagine tracing each line of the Martian surface, feeling textures under your fingertips, sensing the thin air, and hearing the soft whisper of the wind as if it carries the planet's history. Every impression remains vivid, immersive, and calm, a quiet resonance of time and space. You let the sensation of Mars linger as you prepare to leave, carrying the quiet majesty and geological story with you, fully present in memory and imagination.